Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Popcorn and Compliance, a podcast where, with Jay Rosen, we take a look at movies from the compliance perspective. But before we get to our podcast, have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? Would you like to explore some compliance topic? Well, I have founded the Compliance Podcast Network, and I'm looking for new podcasters. If you've wondered how you might start a podcast, please listen to our sponsor, One Stone Creative.
If you're enjoying this show, you might enjoy hosting your own. As an expert in your field, you have skills, knowledge, and insight that can help you expand your practice, meet new people, and create amazing content to share with the world. In as little as 2 hours a week, you can dramatically change how you promote, fill, and position your business. And One Stone Creative can show you how. Learn more at onestonecreative.net.
In today's offering, we are joined by Lisa Fine. Lisa is, of course, co-founder and co-host of the Great Women in Compliance podcast. And she, Jay, and myself take a look at the December release Aquaman. Aquaman is a superhero in the DC universe, and this is his first solo starring role in a movie. I know you will enjoy this episode. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and we are back for another episode of Popcorn and Compliance, where, with Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitors, he and I take a look at a movie that interested us to see what we liked about the movie, what perhaps we didn't like, and what compliance lessons might be drawn from it. Today, you're in for a real treat because we have as a special guest, Lisa Fine, one of two podcast broadcasters of Great Women in Compliance. So, Lisa, first of all, welcome, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm really excited about this.
So are we, Lisa.
Yes, so are we. So Aquaman is one of my favorite cartoon characters from the DC universe. So I'm going to start off by telling a little bit about his backstory, and then go into the movie, which deviated a little bit from his traditional written backstory. And I've got several other resources that we're going to use today, and I cannot commend enough a book I got for Christmas called Anatomy of a Metahuman. And it's actually Batman's secret journal of all of the metahuman superheroes in the DC universe and his notes on how he would fight them if he had to. But it's an excellent resource for the backstory. So Arthur Curry is the son of an Atlantean queen and lighthouse keeper and has many abilities of the underwater people of Atlantis. He was primarily raised by his father, Tom, as his mother, Atlanta, returned to the oceans when Arthur was still a child. Like his mother, he can comfortably live underwater at any depth and can direct the simple minds of sea creatures to do his bidding. He has exhibited great strength, speed, and stamina, as well as extrasensory perception. So with that sort of basic background into it, the movie starts in 1985 when the lighthouse keeper, Tom Curry, rescues Atlanta, the princess of the underwater nation Atlantis, the hidden, lost underwater nation of Atlantis, during a storm. They eventually fall in love and have the son, Arthur, who is born with the power to communicate with marine life forms. Atlanta, unfortunately, is forced to abandon her family and return to Atlantis, entrusting to her advisor, Nikitos Vulko, the mission of training Arthur. Under his guidance, Arthur becomes a skilled warrior, but rejects Atlantis, the undersea empire, upon learning that his mother was allegedly executed for having a half-breed son. In the movie, they start a side plot where Arthur confronts a group of pirates attempting to hijack a Russian naval nuclear submarine. He kills their leader, Jesse Kane, or at least Jesse dies during the confrontation. And Jesse's son, David, vows revenge on Aquaman or Arthur. David targets Atlantis at the behest of Orm, Arthur's younger half-brother, and Atlantis' incumbent monarch, who uses the attack as a pretext to declare war on the surface world. Arthur is one of the other kings of Atlantis, or the underwater world, Nereus, sends her daughter Mira, Mira, to ask Arthur for help. Arthur accompanies Mira after having had a rendezvous with Volko, who urges Arthur to find the Trident of Atlan, a magic artifact that once belonged to Atlantis' first ruler, and with this he can reclaim his rightful place as the king. They are ambushed on the way, but Arthur escapes. Arthur is then captured by Orm. He's not tortured, but he is not treated particularly well. He is offered the opportunity to leave Atlantis forever, but Arthur then challenges Orm to a duel in a ring of underwater lava. It's a very spectacular scene in the movie. Orm gains the upper hand, but Mira comes back to rescue Arthur before Orm can kill him. From there, they travel to the Sahara Desert, where the Trident was forged, and unlock a holographic message that leads them to Sicily. And at Sicily, they retrieve the Trident's coordinates. David Kane, the son of the deceased Jesse Kane, has been given a special suit of armor with which he can fight Arthur as Aquaman. And David Kane rechristens himself as the Black Manta. And they have a spectacular fight scene in Sicily, and Kane or Black Manta is eventually thrown off a cliff by Arthur. Of course, that since this is the 2018 movies, it's clear he's not going to die, because how else would we have a sequel? So then Arthur and Mira return and have a just huge fight with not only Orm, but his armies and his own. Arthur has his own armies backing him. The kingdom of the crustaceans are on his side. The underwater scenes I found to just be spectacular. I'm going to talk about those and some of my lessons learned. Jay, did you have any insights from your insider Hollywood perspective?
Thanks, Tom. What I wanted to look at, just a little nuts and bolts and some money. If you look at the DC Extended Universe, they've made approximately $1.9 billion globally, and that's starting with the first movie, Man of Steel. So it's not taking into account the first Batman trilogy or anything that was done earlier with Tim Burton. Now, if you look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that's with starting with Thor and Iron Man that originally came out from Paramount, in the same space of time, they've done almost $6.9 billion. So I think one of the key things for the DC universe is to come up with the appropriate tone. And with Marvel having somebody running that company, having the vision and really, articulating that vision and having the whole universe going the same way, I think Aquaman is a real success for Warner Brothers and DC. They totally hit it out of the park. And one of the things that I just love is Aquaman just looks like he's having such a great time shooting this movie. And if you go back, he was in Game of Thrones. He's a writer, he's a director. And I think, it shows the foresight when they brought him in originally to be part of, I think it was Man of Steel back in 2013. So it's almost 6 years ago to have thrown the dice on a guy like this who was really kind of unknown prior to his Game of Thrones work. I think it's just wonderful casting, and I could just appreciate the joy he had in playing Aquaman every moment that he was up on the screen. Another thing I really like is, when you take somebody like Nicole Kidman, who really is known for doing more serious movies, to bring her in to the comic book world and to have her play Atlanta, again, another great inspired piece of casting.
So from the screenwriter perspective, or at least the story arc perspective, this is hero takes a journey. And here Arthur is the hero. There's some great scenes where he starts off as sort of the anti-hero, or perhaps you've characterized it even better, Jay, that he's in on not only the secret, but he's in on the joke, and he plays a pretty strong anti-hero to start the movie, and certainly would tip back a few with the lads. So that was fun to see. But he clearly grows in this. He clearly becomes more responsible. He does have some setbacks. He is captured by Orm. He is nearly killed in the ring of lava, but he does prevail. At the end, he, of course, finds the not magical person, as in Obi-Wan Kenobi, but the magical trident. So that Joseph Campbell gets a nod from me as well. So, Lisa, anything about the movie or the story that struck you?
Well, a couple things. I think it obviously looked like Jason Momoa was having a blast, and I thought a lot of the movie was really fun. You were talking, Jay, about DC Universe and the Marvel Universe. I generally am a DC for TV buff versus a Marvel for movies, but I think that they did a really good job in making this one interesting and fun, and I know and visually, a lot of fun and a really good cast. I did feel like throughout it there was almost a lot of almost some cliches where, and I think there were some twists early on in the movie that I thought, oh, this will happen, and it seemed to follow somewhat of that. But again, I have to remember that it's more of the origin story, so these aren't twists as much if you're really a true fan or part of that universe.
So I wanted to maybe move over to some compliance lessons that we might be able to garner on from this movie, and I want to take a little bit different directions and not take my compliance lessons learned from the storyline, but really from the movie itself, and actually even post-production into the marketing, because I thought that it had some interesting lessons that the compliance practitioner could incorporate into a best practice compliance program. So number one, Jay mentioned the financial success of the movie. It's been hugely successful, both nationally and domestically and internationally. And that was had a couple of components that have been noted by the commentators. One was the heavy use of social media by the studio to not only promote but hype the film. They announced this movie really, or its coming out party was at Comic-Con, and they had a large cast from Comic-Con present, and then they also had trailers, first teasers and then trailers for Comic-Con, or rather they were premiered at Comic-Con. So you had, and this was in March 2017, certainly a full year plus before the domestic release. And it created a buzz, and it got me thinking, Jay and Lisa, that you can communicate compliance in a variety of ways. Certainly kind of getting out and creating a little bit of buzz. That's not something that compliance practitioners would typically think about. But maybe take your compliance team on the road. Maybe you create some sort of videos or other multimedia shows that you can market or sell or use as trailers. There's obviously professional production companies, both in film and audio, that can help you with this. So that was sort of one. Number two was along the lines of marketing. They did a worldwide promotion tour. Now, that's not uncommon for certainly this kind of rollout of a movie, but they took the cast out. And that really drove home the message for me that you've got to get out of the ivory tower. You've got to get out and meet your people. You've got to get out and sell yourself and your compliance program. So that was number two. And then if I could move into the technical aspects a little bit, no tracking shots for this movie for me to talk about, Jay, but Industrial Light and Magic, one of my favorite FX shops in Hollywood. It's been around since Star Wars, founded by George Lucas to do the special effects shots for the original Star Wars movies back in the mid-'70s. And here, what struck me, guys, was the crispness of the underwater scenes. I just was blown away by that. So that was sort of special effect number one. But the other thing that I really noticed was everybody's hair flow. Now, Jason Momoa has a huge mane of hair. So that's going to flow wherever he's in. And of course, Nicole Kidman is well stoked and well stocked with a huge mane of red hair as well. But what director Jason Wu wanted he wanted full hair movement with the body movements. And typically in underwater scenes previously, they'd used a technique called strand movements where part of the hair would move. But the director Wu, he wanted individual hair movements. So ILM literally had to create that special effect, making each hair on their actors' heads, of course, digitally move via computer program. And that really drove home the message for me, for the compliance practitioner, that something may be new, something may be high risk, something may be unusual. That doesn't mean you can't do it. It may mean you have to spend more time figuring out how to manage that risk. Simply because something's high risk doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means you have to manage that risk higher. And that really, I love special effects. I always look at my first thing I look for is in the Oscar nominations, which came out yesterday, is the technical Oscars to see who's going to be nominated for special effects. And I thought ILM just knocked this one out of the park on the underwater scenes. And if I could do a little inside Hollywood, Jay, I would just throw in that there are 450 separate shots done by ILM that are part of this movie. So those are my 3 key compliance takeaways.
So I'd just like to piggyback, Tom, on the special effects. Every once in a while, I bring up some of the past films I worked on, and one of the things I worked at Warner Brothers was called The Perfect Storm. And back then, this was from 1998 to 2000, and the big challenge that ILM had was to create a realistic wave that was, all done in post-production on green screens. And that's really the shot that sells the movie, of the boat, the Andrea Gale, going up into that wave and getting tossed. And whether it's ILM doing it, Pixar, or Weta, down in New Zealand, that did all the work on the Hobbit movies, these artists are traditionally challenged. And to your point, Tom, they create something that doesn't exist. And the majority of the special effects shots that we see now, we're not even aware of them in movies because they're doing things like replacing an actor or changing from day to night. So while that attention to detail and the flowing hair is important, to your point, these special effects guys just, constantly are creating new worlds, and it's amazing to see what they come up with. And, it's just really a pleasure to watch.
So do you have some compliance takeaways, Jay?
Do I have compliance takeaways? I think that what I would take away from Aquaman is that when you are on the journey, you always have to remember from where you came. And I think at times Arthur was not sure whether or not he was on the right path, but he understood that he came from 2 worlds, from the world of the sea and from the world of the earth. And by taking the best of both those worlds, he was able to succeed. And I think if we do that and look at it from an ethics and compliance perspective, that there is just no one way to proceed going forward. And in ethics and compliance, I think each of us borrow from the different disciplines that we see in our companies. So whether it's HR or whether it's legal or whether it's operations, we have to remember that we come from all those backgrounds. And if we can kind of take the best of each of those, we can be put on the right path like Arthur has.
Lisa, do you have some compliance lessons learned for us?
I do, and full disclosure, I saw the movie after I knew I was talking with you all about it. So I'm watching it, really thinking about my compliance takeaways. And my major one was looking at Atlantis and King Orm. I was thinking, this is run very poorly, and I don't think anybody is going to be able to help this from an ethics and compliance standpoint. You're talking, when you think about tone from the top, You don't have that. You have a situation where some of the most senior people have to go out and find non-traditional ways to solve the overreaching and overarching ambition of someone who is in charge, and there's no easy way to handle that given the way a hero story or an origin story is in these types of things. So I was thinking a little bit about when things go terribly wrong, what do you do when power is unchecked, and how do you help that? So thinking creatively, and then thinking, well, Mira and others, we had to bring Arthur in. He had to go through his journey, but this was the solution to solving what the problems were there. From a women's standpoint, you wondered at some point if you're thinking about that as the Great Women in Compliance podcaster. I understand that Mira wasn't part of the bloodline, but she seemed tremendously competent as a leader. And I just sort of thought a lot about that whenever there was in those scenes when I wasn't being dazzled by everything that was going on.
So perhaps now we could turn to our ratings. And as our listeners know, we rate each movie with a bucket of popcorn. So Lisa, as you're our guest, you want to tell us how much popcorn you put in your bucket for Aquaman?
Probably 3/4 of a bucket. It was better than a half, but I still thought the story could use a little improvement.
Jay Rosen.
Not only do I have the big bucket that's overflowing, but when I am leaving the concession stand, I asked for my second bucket at the same time, so there would be enough popcorn to feed Mrs. Monitors and Millie and Michaela. So I think it's one box of popcorn overflowing and a sidecar for the rest.
Well, I am forced to agree with Lisa. I give this movie 3/4 of a bucket. I am so jaded now with the quality or lack thereof in Hollywood. I generally walk out with wiping my brow going, wow, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And this movie I didn't have that reaction, but I agree with your points, Lisa. I thought the storyline could have been a little bit better. The origin story I thought could have been a little bit better. There were some spectacular scenes, and no doubt on the special effects scene. Also, given just the quality of the other DC Universe movies, I think this one was very high up there compared to some of those Superman movies. So, but that's 3 positive reviews. So if you are thinking about this movie, we would certainly all suggest that you have some popcorn and watch this movie. Perhaps you could garner some compliance lessons from it. Unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but Lisa, as our guest, do you want to take us home?
I will take us home. And thank you again so much for having me join you all. This is Lisa Fine for Tom Fox, the Compliance Evangelist, and Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitor, saying it's a wrap for this episode of Popcorn and Compliance.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Popcorn and Compliance, where Jay and I were joined by Lisa Fine, co-founder and co-host of Great Women in Compliance. If you have any questions, you can reach out to Jay at jrosen at affiliatedmonitors.com. You can reach me at tfox at tfoxlaw.com. I hope you'll join us for our next episode of Popcorn and Compliance. Popcorn and Compliance is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.